I can hear myself very loudly now, the microphone. All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk today about the future teachers that I work with and some research that I'm doing with them. And since we've talked a little bit about the fear, the dislike that they bring to mathematics, and, I always tell them my story that math was never my thing. I tolerated it because I knew I had to do it. It would help me get my degree, but that was it. Until I had an experience in my master's, actually, where it was for the first time in my life I actually understood the math that I had just been doing. And that kind of changed my whole perception and sent me on a completely different career path. And I ended up teaching future math teachers. So I could feel in the room that there was just this dislike or intolerance with the subject. They didn't want to be there, and I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. So I started an activity a couple of years in that I had heard to do with grade 7, 8 students. So I thought, I'll try it with the adults and see what happens. And it ended up being the basis of some research that I ended up doing because I was seeing a pattern. So I wanted to kind of explore it. So that's one of the things talk about today. So really, my work focuses on looking at what teachers believe, because I know that impacts what they're going to do in the classroom, and what their attitudes are, because that's going to impact things. Working with current teachers, it was always frustrating to hear, well, I don't really like math, so I leave it till the end of the day and hope that I run out of time. And I was shocked by some of these comments, not surprised, but shocked that this is how they would do it. For me, it was always the first thing I did so I could make sure I could tackle it, get it over with, and then I could move on with my day. But now it's the only thing I want to do. So I like to share that with my pre-service teachers. So I've got two kind of parts to what I'm going to talk about. The first is the snowball activity. And I did this for 2 years before I started wanting to investigate more. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the personal narratives that I did with 1 year of my cohorts, just to get a little more information about what I was finding. So looking at the methods. So the first one is my snowball activity. So this I do with them on the very first day of class. I give them a blank piece of white paper and make them write down 5 words or phrases that they immediately think of when I say the word mathematics. Then I have them crumple it up into a ball, the snowball, and then they throw it somewhere else in the room, and everybody has to read somebody else's snowball. And I find it really gets that conversation going and thinking about how everybody else feels about mathematics. And the first time I did it, I knew some of what I would hear, but I was really surprised by how overwhelmingly negative the comments seemed to be. That anonymity of not having to write their name on it, not having to write their own thoughts, made them a little more honest. So it was really interesting. So after the first time I did it, I put it into a word cloud to show to them so that they could get an idea of what it was they were saying. So this is a compilation of 4 different cohorts over 2 years on what their snowball activity is. So I'm going to show that. And then once I looked at those and started really kind of digging into it, I realized there's got to be a reason for why this is what they're saying about mathematics. So I started having them write what their mathematics stories were. And that was the only thing that I told them, is that it's what are your experiences, what you feel, what moments stick out, and then I did some digging into that for this research. So I used a thematic analysis to kind of go through them, but I used it differently for each of the parts. So for the snowball activity, I just looked at the themes, or the data. So I had 253 unique data points, and then I connected them to codes, and then I compiled those codes into overarching themes. With the personal narratives, it was a little different, and again, it's not coming up here, but it is here. So I looked at those themes to see what changes occurred in their perspectives, and I didn't really look for overarching themes, just ways to kind of group them together, because their stories were so unique in very different ways. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I found with that. So I'm hoping that this is excellent. So we're going to talk about the snowball activity first. So I'm just going to show you the image. So this is using a word cloud. This is all of the statements that came up more than one time. If I included all of the ones that came up only once, then you wouldn't be able to see anything. So just to make it a little easier to see, the bigger the word, the more times it came up. So what do you notice? Numbers, yes, numbers jumps right out at you. What else do we notice? Hard, difficult, or both very big. Challenging.
Fun.
So, yes, exactly. So the words that are jump out at you, other than this odd little fun that you can see, they're not overly positive. They're feeling ones. So I did some digging into looking at this, and I realized that I could compile them kind of into 5 overarching themes. Comments that were positive, comments that were negative, things that were more neutral, that they were the way they felt, but they were neither inherently positive positive or negative. Thank you. And then looking at the difficulty of mathematics. So words that hard, challenging, because those could be either positive or negative depending on the student. And then the biggest category was just mathematical contents terms, things like bedmass and addition, fractions, and number, as we could see. What was really interesting when I looked at it were what the top 5 recorded words or phrases were. Numbers was huge. Hard, addition, problem solving, and difficult were the top 5. And when you look at just the comments about, and again, it's not coming up. So if I removed the comments that were talking about content, negative comments accounted for 44%. So almost half of the comments that were not about content were about how much they disliked mathematics or something negative about it, whereas positive comments only accounted for 12%, which was a huge gap for me thinking about that. But I didn't think that was enough to really talk about, so I wanted to know why. Why do they feel this way? Because something happened. As Cynthia mentioned, some sort of event has scarred them in mathematics. So I wanted to see if I could find some sort of themes or ideas that were recurrent in their stories. So I started by looking for things that were positive, because I thought I need happy. So we're going to start with what things were positive. So a lot of students mentioned some sort of specific course. So these were the top 5 things that came out when people were positively talking about mathematics. So usually if they were talking about a positive course, it was either data management or statistics. Some people thought that the idea that math has a right and a wrong, there's no gray area like in writing. If you use a formula, you'll get a right answer. That's all there is to it. They liked that. Some of them said it was fun, and that was why they enjoyed mathematics. The fact that it was challenging was enjoyable, and that it was a puzzle that could be solved, and that there was a solution, and they knew that if they plugged at it long enough, they would get an answer. And that they liked that. That was what made it good for them. But there was one category that came up more than anything else, and that was teachers. That there was a teacher that showed them that they cared, that took an interest in them, who made it fun and challenging. And that's what made mathematics a positive experience. And I don't know why it's not coming up, but I can see it in front of me. So, all right, so then I looked at, okay, what made it negative? And some of the same things came up, which was really interesting. But when they mentioned a specific course, it was either calculus or functions. And that's when they decided math was not fun anymore. They couldn't do it. They didn't like math because they just had to memorize it. There was no understanding. It was just a memorization. They didn't like math because of this fear of being wrong, and that there was a ridicule that was associated with it if they were incorrect. And another one that came up a lot was this focus on speed and doing drills and practice. Mad Minutes came up a whole lot of times in my look through it, and Round the World was the other one that came up. And the idea that it was really boring because you just had to practice. A teacher would assign you 25 problems, and then you would just have to do them, and the quicker you got them done, then you could do something better, which was not a great kind of attitude. But then again, the same most important category came up in this, was there was a teacher that made it negative. And it was a teacher who was either unapproachable, was unhelpful, or they were unable to explain mathematics in a different way. So a couple of the stories really talked about this one teacher who would, and they were different teachers, obviously, but this teacher who would, when they'd ask for another explanation or they didn't quite understand, would just say the exact same things a little louder. And that was supposed to help them understand mathematics. So that was when they stopped enjoying mathematics. So then I looked at when. So some people specifically pinpointed when in their trajectory mathematics went from loving it to hating it. This was kind of the number of people that it came out, because not everybody mentioned a specific time, but overwhelmingly in high school that things changed, and that's when they stopped liking mathematics. They were good with it right up until they hit grade 9, and then all of a sudden it was different. And then they just didn't like it anymore, and usually it was a teacher or a specific course that turned them off, and so that was kind of interesting. And some students just mentioned, I hit calculus, that's when it stopped making sense. That was when I stopped enjoying it. So in looking at just those things, and that was really what I wanted to kind of look at, because they were future teachers, one of the things that they started to do was think about how they would change that narrative for their own students. And thinking about what was missing from their experiences, or what was in their experiences that made mathematics something that they wanted to do. So that came up with some really interesting kind of themes that came out. And the 5 most common ones that were in the majority of the narratives were that it was connected to their life. Whenever there were those real life connections and they could see how it could be used in something they were doing, it was enjoyable. When it was applicable, they could actually see a use for it, even if it wasn't in their life, but that it was going to be useful for something other than to pass a math test. It needed to be something more applicable than that. That whenever they had different approaches for the same idea, that was better. Different ways to explain it, different ways to do it, different ways to talk about it, and that made it enjoyable. And then another overwhelming theme was that they would gain valid life problem-solving skills. And when the math focused on those, that made it interesting. It wasn't so much about the math, but how they could use that critical thinking and problem-solving in other areas of their life, not just with math. And that there was this need for an appropriate level of challenge. That it wasn't too hard, but it also wasn't too easy, and then that was what made it so enjoyable. So thinking about that, I looked at what this kind of told me. And it was interesting that there were some areas of overlap. Some people said that they hated mathematics because it was reliant on formulas, and other people said that that's what made it easier and that's what made it easier, which was really interesting. And then there were some students who talked about math minutes as being the best part of their day, and other students who it just terrorized them. So it wasn't that I could really parse out these things were the bad things and these things were the good things. But what really was interesting was there was a clear connection between their thoughts and perceptions of skill and how much they enjoyed it. Yeah. Very few participants said they liked math, but weren't very good at it. And very few said that they hated math, but were good at it. Overwhelmingly, it was if they didn't like math, it was because they weren't good at it. Or they would say that I wasn't good at it, so I didn't like it. Or, on the other hand, that I enjoyed it and was good at it. So there was definitely a connection between their perception of how much they could do math, and that related to how much they enjoyed doing math. The other thing that became really important in looking at this, and behind me, was how important a teacher was to the story. And for me, that was a really critical moment in talking with my future teachers, that when they realized that there was a specific adult, this teacher, that had changed their perception one way or the other, it really changed their desire to be something more than someone who just hated mathematics because they didn't want their students to do that. They wanted to do better than the experiences that had happened to them. And they really focused focused on what they could do, what they wouldn't do, to be teachers that would help support them in developing a love of mathematics, regardless of how they felt going to school. And that became a really important thing in my courses, working on changing what they believed mathematics was. It's not just this focus on skills, formulas, and drills, or this need for a right answer, but there's something else. And through re-experiencing mathematics in a different way, thinking about how they could bring that experience to their own courses, but I had to start making sure that they were enjoying it and how they thought about it. And then finally, the kind of important piece, the reason I started doing this, was I wanted them to start confronting their own pasts and thinking of how they could change that narrative for themselves so that they wouldn't be the teacher standing in front of the room saying, well, I hate math, but we have to do it, so let's go to it. And keeping those words out of their classrooms and keeping those thoughts and those perceptions influencing the way their students feel about mathematics. So I keep telling them that maybe one day I'll be able to give the snowball activity and I'll see a different picture. And the big word on it will be fun and love, and I will see these positive comments. So I'm telling them they're my hope for the next generation, that they're going to help change this mindset. Lots of time for questions.
You did. You did. You would have to give you guys time.
I did need the hug. I'm getting
Yes, please, Judy. When you had one of the positive things that your future teachers talked about was real world. In my mind, I jumped from real connections, which I completely can see are positive, to word problems, which everyone hates, everyone's always hated. And I just wonder if you probe at all, or if you have thought of probing what they mean by real world connections, because traditionally that means word problems, and traditionally people hate them. So
when I talk to them about what they mean around that, interviews, I didn't talk about that there and probed more into their stories. But when I asked questions around that, it wasn't the word problems, it was the canned word problems that didn't make sense in life. That they were just numbers, that was what they didn't like. But when it was something that they could actually see connecting something they could do, we had a problem about sports scores. And a lot of the students who were in that sport just really got into the problem because it fit with a game that they had watched and they remembered watching the game, and so that kind of connection. It had to be more than just the word problem. It had to really be realistic and authentic. So not a fake real world problem, really authentic, realistic problem. Yeah. Yes. I had one of them who came to me on day one and said, I hate mathematics. I'm not going to survive your course. There's no way I'm going to do this. And I said, okay, I'll talk to you in 10 weeks. And she came to me at the end and she says, I actually spent my lunch doing math. What have you done to me? So I figured it was a win. I was okay with that. She wasn't, but it was good. All right?
Of all those comments special teachers made, for me, I think it's one that strips out level of challenge. And so in a classroom in particular, because the different is making more students in the classroom, what do you feel, did they come up with any solutions as to how they would be able to challenge all students on an individual level? So they could be frustrated for a little while, but then you can take them out of that frustration and help them. Like, how would that possibly be managed?
That's a fabulous question, and I don't know the answer. And one we struggle through as we talk about it, and think about lesson planning. How do we build those appropriate supports to help those students without making them? So that's when I'm still trying to grapple with, because it's yes, process is a lot of fun. Sure, it's only going to get better.
You're an Peter, right? So, just to clarify, so they identified what it is they felt that they needed to provide for their students,
And so they talked about the real life connection and that was applicable. As part of your research, did you explore how that might happen? So how are we going to help our new teachers better understand the role of problem solving or real life application? So was that part of the study as well?
Yes. So that was one of the things that I kind of, after, like they write their narratives on the first day, and then they go back and reflect on it throughout the course and what their interests changed, and what their perceptions now thinking teachers are. So with them, the clearest thing was actually experiencing it for themselves and experiencing that kind of, so more often than not, I would get the comments like, I like that you teach us the way you teach elementary school students, because I can see how it would work in a classroom. And then I was so successful that told me that this could work with other students.
Well, just thinking that a better word than real life would be hands-on or tangible, or things you can actually work with, so to speak, with your hands.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So that was the other thing that a lot of them talked about, but it wasn't one of the bigger ideas, was the hands-on, the concrete, the being able to actually manipulate the math that they thought was so abstract and was something that they couldn't picture. Now they could actually see it, and they could see how students would appreciate it.
I'm just wondering if there was any investigation into the actual pathways that these students had themselves. So are you looking at students who went U level all the way through? Did everything, are they stopped out in any way? Did they go through C level, transfer through, have an unusual pathway into?
So the majority of the ones that I worked with, I did ask them when the last course was, whether it was applied or academic. The majority of them stopped at the very last math class that they absolutely had to take in high school. So the majority of the ones that I worked with have not taken a university level math course, and a lot of them only took applied courses because they tried academic and couldn't do it, or they bullied it through in academic, got a 52, and they were really proud of their 52. So I haven't really looked into that, but it tended to be the academic courses that were often mentioned as being the turning point where they started to do mathematics. So they made the choice to drop mathematics or step down.
Did any of them talk about their struggles actually being a positive influence on the way that they taught? So I could really teach math as well because as a student I struggled. It would be opposite, like I had a problem teaching because I always understood it easily.
So that because I don't have a lot of them who feel really comfortable with the mathematics, yes, that tends to be where they get really angry with me and won't let them just use formulas. I will make them break it down, and then going by going, a grade 3 doesn't know algebra. How are you going to, so that I purposely irritate them. But on the other hand, yes, there is a lot of that. I didn't do well in math. I don't want my students to struggle, but I can identify with their struggle, so we're going to get through this together. Yeah, so that was definitely something that we heard over and over again.
Correct here. So in your interview, you said that teachers were kind of that pinnacle of either loving or creating math going forward. Did you find anyone mentioning that parents kind of as that model, or do you think it's different?
So yeah, I had a couple of students talk about a parent being the person who either they like it or love it. One very vivid story of a parent who used to whack her with a ruler when she couldn't get the answers right. Was one of the more crushing stories, but yes, there was usually, but not normally in a positive way. If they mentioned parents, it was because of something negative.
Please. Thank you very much. You're in Ontario, right? In Ontario, students can come into the program and now they're going to be so that was it.
Yes, right now there's a lot of terror in my cohort around this. So yes, there's a lot of fear around that because it's the unknown at this point for some of them. Yes.
So my question was around student blind test.
Yes.
You're taking my hand on where they are.
Well, that this year, the students are still working on them right now. One thing that I asked them to do is actually go back and intentionally reflect on what they thought and perceived about mathematics, how they're going to help motivate and inspire students despite in spite of their students. So yes, that's definitely kind of the word of the day. There's a lot of yets in my class. When somebody says something to me, oh, I can do it. Well, you can't do it yet. Let's work on it. So yes, that's the letter that they hear all the time. Some of them do because they've had something happen that they put up these blinders and they just can't do it. So it's until they start getting those little successes that they realize, yes, okay, I can do this. So that was why on the first day I did this, to get those ideas out in the front. Okay, you're not alone. There are other people who either let's work together to try and so we do. Usually if students, I've had a couple of students come see me and say, I can't do your class, like I can't keep up with it. I said, change your group. Find a different group to sit with. Don't sit with that group. And that usually is they find a group that's more at their level, and that changes the story. So I had those people that do this, I can't, who are now saying, I can do this. I volunteer to teach math in school, and it's fabulous. And
That's what I remember just seeing those. You knew what classroom it was because there'd be tears. There'd be people crying. And in the education wing, that was the pre-service. They didn't have math room, and you just your heart breaks for them. So it's wonderful that you're so supportive and unraveling all this trauma. Jumping into math, as we know, is so reinforced with everywhere they go. As soon as they say, I'm like, oh, it's okay, I get it. Yeah. Good for you. All right, yeah.
Okay, one thing I just want to echo Peter's comment. I mean, I also have a problem with real world, right? So
We know that.
yes. You can say true life situation, something like that.
Yeah.
We usually think of mathematics as an isolated island. I haven't heard of polls of students and teachers saying biology, chemistry. I'm sure they'll say I hate chemistry. Doing labs at Mark, if you have to do all labs to finish chemistry course, you cannot say I hate labs. I want to do half of them only, right? So maybe we are listening too much to our students. So what if they hate them, right? What are we going to do about that, right? I mean, they hated math 15 years ago. We haven't done much in the last 15 years. So what is going to change in the next 15 years, right?
Well, so it wasn't about trying to change their story. It was having them in front and seeing those parallels and their experiences are great. And I share with them that, Anne was the reason that I actually changed literacy. I had a literacy supervisor. I was going to go through my PhD in literacy, and Anne derailed my entire life plan. And that's why I'm standing here. So, and it was because of my story that made me want to change the narrative for other people. So, and that is one thing I stress with them. That maybe these experiences were bad, but what did you learn from those experiences that you can apply to your classroom to change so that the narrative's not the same? And really, when it came down to the teacher piece, and that was where they pinpointed, that was really anybody who talked about it negatively, there was a teacher involved somehow that changed their perception. And anybody who talked about it really positively, it was a teacher that changed things for the better or just continued to make it. So I think that was the more important piece for me. But it was just interesting seeing some of the things that they picked at, and that there was not this clear, these are the bad things and these are the good things. That's something different. And then some of them did talk about real world, and that was or real life, that was their words. That's why I use them. But the fact that some of them actually said that it didn't have to be real world, just something that they knew was applicable, something that could be used to do something.
The point is, Miroslav, these are teachers. They're not students of mathematics. Teaching other students mathematics, and that's where the beliefs, relationships, attitude piece becomes so crucial.
Critical, yeah.
Great, and we'll always continue in lunchtime.